Okay, and good afternoon also from us, Marita Mukkonen, Ivor Stadolski of Artists at Risk. We're very pleased that we're able to have with us today for the second section, Institutions as Resistance, the curatorial group of Documenta 15, Ruangrupa. And we're really happy that Reza, Asung, Afisina, and Farid, Rakun can join us today. We're going to be talking about their institution, their experience with them as resistance.
Thank you very, very much for having us. Yeah, I'm Farid. I'm calling from Jakarta right now, part of Ruangrupa.
My name is Reza Afisina. Thank you very much. I'm part of Ruangrupa. And also now already almost 2 years in Kassel.
Where is the Ruru house in Kassel? In which building is it where is it located?
It is very close to this. I mean, it is in the center, quite close to Fredisianum.
Okay.
Yeah. So it used to be a Kaufhalle, and then / sports arena, and then after many years it's being empty. Now we are occupying it.
Because what we're trying to do right now, it's not something new. We've been trying to do it at least since 2016, something called Bloomboom, or directly translated, it's a rice barn, but we use that vernacular term, how to actually see ourselves as resources, as bank of resources, and then share it together. So push the collectivity into practice in like thinking about what we have as a surplus. So some values is actually sufficiency, you know, like if we follow the capitalistic thinking, let's say, then it's never enough. But like how to practice sufficiency, therefore we can recognize where we actually have more, and then how to share it further. Not only money, of course, but space, time, knowledge, etc. So intangible stuff as well. There's so many empty buildings, so many homeless people, which are actually happening, even still happening right now. No, it doesn't make sense. If we can see it at the spaces as like collective own resource that can be shared further, it's kind of like that we are in the line of that thinking. And then we're seeing or we're trying to imagine if documenta, an edition of documenta at least, can be seen that way as well.
Most of us grew up in the sense of new order regimes, lots of different kind of repressions, and also like partly on how we are try to build ourselves as a part of the identity. And not only like because us as a students or the art students, but to have us identifying ourselves to regard what Farid mentions about us, how sufficient we are if we would like to share something together out in our practices. For example, there's a lot of different tensions during that time. So mostly our common enemy is in Jakarta, mostly is about the space, how we try to like really engage or have like sensibility to also acknowledge what kind of space that we need. Because during our practice back in the art school, for example, there's no such thing, acknowledgement to regard, hey, later on you're going to be an artist and then having studios, you know, and then have like a sense of freedom of expression, something like that. We don't have like these particular discussions. Even we don't know about the term, what so-called artist initiative, or what is artist residency, or, you know, what is collective artist, for example. We don't have this term back in our college time. We don't know. We only like working together in the sense on how us having this cultural ability. For example, I came from West Java province, and then most of our tribe in Sundanese context, working together is a main point, because we live in the farming agricultural sense, how we grew up at least. So when I came to Jakarta, for example, as an individual and becoming student, I also met another friend that came from different islands with a different culture. As you know, Indonesia is an archipelago, right? So when we met in Jakarta as a part of so-called center, could accommodating different kind of dreams, then we start to think, how if we live together, for example? How if we would like to occupy space during this particular era? Up until 98, we are part of the college student movement. Then suddenly after that, we are trying to initiate very roughly to regain or to have our own space, and then to share our capability or our resources individually, and then to share, put those on the table and make conversations later on. And then suddenly we never know. Up until now, it's already more than 22 years, and then suddenly we are here. And then artist is not that important for us in Jakarta, because most of us thinking to go to Jakarta is to get rich, you know, having credited as a professional, having like good salary, and then we return it back to our home, back home. I mean, so this is like the way that we're thinking about, like, okay, how this is could be aligned. Our practice as an artist, we don't have so-called, you know, fancy gallery, art market situations. Most of Jakarta's artists up until now even not goes to our art fair. It's silly. Many for other artists that go to the art fair, it came from another cities, which is good. So Jakarta is not accommodating but this artistic sense. For us, it's okay. So we could have our own playground, let's say with a good school, for example.
I'm really fascinated also by the personal side of it and all how you came from another region and how you then developed it collectively over so many years without even noticing how it developed, in a sense. There wasn't an intentional, like, you know, art practice or any kind of philosophical or even ideological move. It was just like your practice also came from your culture, the one that you had through your family or your background. I think this kind of leads us to a bit of the question we're trying to get to, which is about institutions and how can they be resistant, what formats or forms they could take to do so, and what are they resistant against. But we're talking about kind of organizing against authoritarian tendencies in that kind of world in which they're dominant. And so what kind of institutions are we thinking of? You know, and you're showing an example, even though you didn't intentionally construct it. How do you think it worked out? And do you think it's able to create some kind of a way and how it can resist?
The importance is not become institution, but the importance is on how we could be part as a policy making. So this is like really hard. Like policy making in the sense that we govern together, not govern, but if we believe in one ecosystem, then we believe in the different kind of supporting system based on their needs. Not like, you know, 20,000 euro for us and 10,000 euro for you. Yeah, it's not like that, but it's based on necessity, on how we share, and then how we have these capacities on, you know, interlink, not overlapping, but fill in the gap. That's most of the things that we are trying to find. For example, we don't try to change anything that comes in our government policies in the sense, but we need to have like dialogue with them intensively, just to find out that if you have your own nomenclature within your own policies, but at least we should know in which part that we could also react to it, to accompany and working together within this. It's not like because the government not taking care about us. No, the government is always taking care about us, but sometimes they didn't know how to handle a baby, for example. How to carry around the baby, they didn't know. But they know that we have a baby on our own. They could say like, okay, I give you milk, but okay, just milk or something like that. So this is like our dialogue that we need to perform at least. So probably that's my elaboration right now. Farid?
We kind of like deny that fact for a long time, that we don't want to be an institution, you know, but then because of the burden that it comes with it, but we came into peace more into that kind of like notion, because we realized what we're doing as well, because there's no mainstream. That's why we cannot be alternative, that we're not doing like, you know, we don't fall easily into categories such as institutional critique or socially based practice, relational aesthetics, you know, whatever, all those things. We just never sit down nicely or comfortably in that. So we understand what we're doing as institutional practice as well. Little things like scale, bureaucracy, all those kind of stuff. We've made those type of works, like a lot of times it's maintenance works, invisible works, all those kind of stuff. it becomes actually our artistic practice, like what Asung, what Reza said before. That's what, like, the structure, when Reza was mentioning the structure, well, we have a board, we have a director, all those kind of stuff. It's actually all can be seen as fictional, and then therefore it's artistic and poetic and all those kind of stuff as well. We can change it anytime we like, and then how we deal up until now, we're still dealing with how, like, the rejection of making a report, for example, or the skepticism towards, then it becomes artistic work in itself. And then scale, in a sense that we should not be too big, because a lot of times what we've learned from these big institutions that we have been working with is, like, when it becomes too big, then immediacy, like the immediacy of our work, then it becomes hard to practice, let's say. So to keep small and agile and reactionary, I think it's something we have to keep. Therefore, something like Bloomboom, for example, we see it not as a big umbrella that oversees everything, not a theme, but it's a protocol that can connect little dots in a lot of places, and then these little dots have independence in how to act, so it's not a dinosaur, it's not too old, it's not too big, that it's just like too big to fail.
I think that's what we are talking about also in our work. When we work with artists at risk, actually we don't work on metaphoric terms like art world often does. I mean, basically it means that we work with professional artists. That's very important, who are at risk and who are in a situation that they need a breather, or they have to flee their countries for some time. So it's different, that kind of doing artistic work about it or curating its exhibitions about it. It just means that it's really hands-on concrete work. And in this kind of work, you can't either your starting point can't be that to which conceptual category do we fit in. And I think the starting point is something really different, that there are Afghan artists who are now sitting in their safe houses, they are in hunger, they have to get visas, they have to get out. And I think that we are also talking about in this symposium that how kind of institutions of all kinds can actually change their practice and act in this kind of situation. And I think that we live in these kind of emergencies now for many reasons, that we also had to be able to kind of break out of this kind of conceptual, discursive categories which are there. And I think that these categories they will take shape as we do our work, as you say, in a way that it's kind of, we have to work that way at the moment.
As you said, you had to do this difficult transformation from being a group of friends to becoming like some form of a, you had legal entity, but aside from that, also, that you're involved in many processes. And so then there's all kinds of new things that you're encountering, responsibilities and commitments and forms of promises and the things that you want to carry on, because that's what you're known as, and want to keep doing that. And it's not just because you just happen to feel that way, but you have some kind of, dedication. And I realized the word that you used, interestingly, Reza, that was, you said that we're now aligned. Yeah, and you kept on saying, using the word aligned. I found that interesting because, well, obviously, the first, thing that comes to mind when if somebody from Indonesia is, the non-aligned movement, I founded in Bandung, and so on. So this is a history which really has to be kind of remembered and spread further, to understand what happened in that period where many countries of the world didn't want to be part of either a major power bloc of either the Soviet system or the US capitalist system. And so they wanted to find a different path. And so that's the first thing. But we've also, in our work, used this term, but as we talked about realigned, because we found, and this is a generational question now, that, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, right, the kind of counterpower to capitalism disappeared. But before that, there was this position like, okay, being non-aligned is like a progressive position because you're neither on this authoritarian side or that authoritarian side. But when it collapsed and suddenly, you know, you have to do something, you can't just say that I'm doing nothing. That's being apolitical is a political position, right? Saying I'm apolitical is a political position. And so we said, no, there's going to be a moment where people realign, and perhaps they can cross those old boundaries of, you know, the socialist hates the communist and the anarchist hates the social, and so on and so forth. And that, you know, you have a commons movement where this is, I understand you use that term too, commons and sustainable kind of communities and forms of commoning. And this is really interesting. And I would like to know, how do you see this in a kind of generational perspective of realigning?
In this kind of reliant movement, it means that you have kind of certain common values you share, and you have a common direction. It's basically that as you kind of share certain, its basic values, and you can create a kind of direction and movement based on that.
In a commons.
For us, being an artist or stating ourselves as an artist, it's very political gesture back in Indonesia's context, because this word actually is not exist in our level of, you know, structural, like in the government, like in the, you know, kind of like professions, for example. I mean, if you state right now in our ID, Indonesian's ID, we call it that we are an artist. There's only like one line that you could state. Like my other friends, it's better to have professions right down in the ID. It's like a barber, for example, or hairdresser. It's better like that, because artist is not like in our statuta. So we are not being accommodating enough or having privilege or gaining, like, you know, kind of like social security or, you know, healthcare from the government. If you are considering, you know, artists, what kind of artist, what things that you do. Most of them know is painting, or probably they could say you are a photographer. Is much more easier, just like what I did in the passport for the first time. Because when I said like I'm an artist, what kind of artist did you do? I don't know, new media probably. What is new media? Yeah, it's video. Okay, so you are cameraman? No, not really. So it's kind of like a very, you know, then we have to adjust also with their own mindset with this particular system, right? So we said like, yeah, we came from the creative industry. But if you said creative industry, it feels like entrepreneurship. And it said like, oh, so you do business your own. What kind of thing that you sell? That's a creative, right? Okay, then we have to like really not having debate, but having like a very long engagement with this conversation. And then suddenly, okay, it's better you mentioned that you are a photographer. That's it, tough. And then you are becoming a photographer yourself, which is nice, even though it's not necessities, but at least we are being acknowledged. So that's first. And the second, I grew up in the very conservative Islam back in the West Java province. Even up until now, my father-in-law is still really quite stronghold within the fundamentalists. But the way that I grew up, actually, I studied in the Catholic school since I was kindergarten, probably up until I was in the high school. So I received Catholic educations in the sense, and the other hand, I also grew up in the very strong Muslim context. And then some part of my family, for example, getting related to this Islamic movement back in the 40s, I forgot. But they're becoming enemy of them, / also becoming enemy of the government. So we need to leave our hometown, and then we live in the big cities like Bandung in West Java. But we're still in the center of the Sundanese tribe. So we are up okay until now, even though West Java province is still occupying by very strong fundamentalist party organizations in the part of the political party in Indonesia. But gladly, we still could blend in within this particular conditions or situations right now, and then how we negotiate also to regard the neighbor and everything. We are still in the sense delivering the same respects that we used to have, we are having up until now in the society's context or in the levels of educations, even though in the West Java province, when you go to school, for example, your choice is only two: go to the public school or Islamic school. So most of the private school actually it's being governed by Islam organizations. Yeah. So for example, like my kids, 2 of them went to the school. It's not a public school, it's a private school, but still in the Islamic context. Because public school it sucks. That's the things. After 98, actually, it seems like red carpet to other generations that follow us. I mean, in the sense like, you know, especially in the Jakarta's context, right? Because there's no such thing as repressions. There's no such thing as censorships. There's no such thing as a common enemy, because they could have like the privilege. This is like open democracies, you know, the system is there, especially to regard the digital platform arise. And then our education, for example, talking about, let's say, colonialism, it's still there up until now in our educations, public school, private school, everything. We're still learning about on how us, before Indonesia, we are being colonized by the Dutch for 350 years. And then after that, with Japan for 3.2 or 3.5 years afterward, up until independence era. We're still learning about that very deep down. Then we know that that's our roots within colonialization. And also partly like even my daughter, which is now 10 years old, back in the educations in the elementary school in Jakarta, before we left here in July 2020, she still received this particular education's knowledge about colonialism, for example. And also partly about how communism is relatively not good, something like that. So we still, I mean, comparing to the things the way that we heard about the Dutch education system, they never like really addressing this colonialism to their particular generation, younger generations, right? But us, we're still practicing it. So this is like the way on how we are trying to balance, and especially ever since that we are grew up in the new order regime, at least up until could be our generations till 98, the new order regime setting up their own history on how they try to brainwash us within their own notions of creating the new history, the way that they would like to be narrated, the way that they would like to be identified and to embed in our society, like the gate community, like any other particular levels about the structures of new order regimes, about how bad is communism. Like each year, each of every one of us, neither you sit in the school or at home watching your only national televisions, you're still watching the same movies for 3 hour length about how bad is communism, creating by very famous director, and it is really indeed very good movies. I mean, in the scope of cinematography, because I study cinematography and I'm not graduated, by my major is sound director, but that's a very good movies. And then can you imagine that we have to watch it every September 30th?
Yeah.
So, but now it's not happening. I mean, it's now it's violated your rights, you know, to like really sit in the television and then you have to watch this. I mean, it's like you're imposing something.
One of the connections actually with the Ruru House, and we will talk about that, it's also later on in section 3, is that it's kind of a friend of ours, anthropologist, is David Kreper. It's basically worked for a long time. It's on a book. It's together with archaeologist David Wengro, and one of the kind of interesting things they kind of found out that it's Venda Nation, for example, that they had this kind of ongoing democratic councils going on it's every day. And in a way that it's also the space you are creating in Rural House is kind of something like that you actually have a conversation on daily basis. It's about the common things you have to decide about and what you are kind of talking about. And the rules for this kind of, it is like spaces and democratic models that they are actually going far back, which is also very interesting. But this model is just not of democratic councils, is discussing and deciding on daily basis. It's not happening in many institutions, of course, but it's interesting to introduce this kind of model. I mean, it's also in the art context.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Take a good care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.